context for us, it kind of alerts us to the fact that the gin and tonic, before it became Spanished, was a sort of early 20th century phenomenon that kind of grew. And you also, I mean, to me, when I think of a classic gin and tonic, it is served in a straight, tall Collins glass with, a wedge of lime in it. It is not clear, but it is not colored. It is relatively neutral in color. And to me, the carbonation seems to be one of the important things at play here. And when I think about the history of carbonation wasn't really happening at scale until the early 20th century. So if we're thinking about this gin and tonic as it existed in our cocktail consciousness, really it's an early 20th century phenomenon when they first started scaling the carbonated, you think of the glass soda siphons and stuff like that, when they finally started finding ways to export this and serve at scale with these types of drinks. So knowing that, like, this is what we imagine a gin and tonic to be in the 20th century, Collins glass, no color, the only color being that, that wedge of lime, very refreshing is how I think of it. Am I missing any like attributes of like what we think of this like prototypical gin and tonic before we move to Spain?
I think that even within that, there's variation between what you would get in the US and what you would get in the UK. And I would say, if you look at like today, even now, the gin and tonic in the UK is so much more popular as a portion of gin drinks served in the UK than it is in the US. But they've kind of gone their own slightly different ways as well. I mean, the US is I think really a stronger history of highballs, and arguably, I mean, gin tonic is basically a highball. Particularly if you're using a tonic syrup, if you've got your gin and then you put your lemon or your lime juice in, and then you put the tonic syrup in, and then you put some, soda water, seltzer water. I mean, what's the difference between the tonic syrup and the sugar syrup, other than you've got this sort of quinine flavor? So I do see like. There's almost, you could argue, like a sort of American style, and the idea of squeezing the citrus in there so the juice is in there. That seems to be something that, at least in my experience, I see more when I'm drinking in the US than I do here. Largely because you're not necessarily going to get the fresh citrus here, or if you do, it'll be such a thin sliver that you won't. I've seen people like prepare lemon, generally it would have been, but they prepare the lemon and they get a good like 16 slices out of one lemon. It's swapper thin at the time. But the other difference between the US and the UK is the prevalence of ice. And so the US has had a much more great availability of ice and refrigeration and freezers, particularly at home, than you would have in the UK. I can't remember exactly the figure now, but something like by the late 70s, only half of UK households had a freezer.
Mm-hmm.
So this is in comparison. I can't remember what the figure is for the US, but we were slower adopters for freezers for sure. And actually, someone was telling me a story, anecdotal story, but up until about late 80s, early 90s, it wasn't. This idea of having really cold gin and tonics and having really effervescent gin and tonics wasn't so known in the UK. In the fact that, like, if you went to a bar, or you went to a pub, usually it'd be a pub that you would go to, you would have a bucket of ice for everybody on the bar, and you'd be served your gin and your tonic. The tonic might not be put in the fridge, probably wouldn't be. And you would just add the ice yourself. And that ice would have just like come out of like a freezer tray. So once the ice was gone, you just had a warm gin and tonic, which is why if you watch a number of British sitcoms from the late 80s, early 90s. So one particular favourite of mine is As Time Goes By, which has got Dame Judi Dench in it. If people haven't seen it, do check it out. And they drink quite a lot of gin and tonics, but the tonic water is always on the side, and they have it in a cut glass tumbler, and they just put the gin in, and the tonic is as warm as you like. Not sometimes ice, not always, but that tonic is usually out. So it will be sweeter, it will be obviously warmer, and it will be less fizzy. And this is the sort of the story I heard recently, was that Gordon spent a lot of money in the 90s going around encouraging bars to serve gin and tonics on ice. And before that, it just wasn't so popular. But they had, like, there was a really big campaign to serve they had all the branded ice buckets and stuff, to really big push to serve gin and tonics on ice in the UK. So we have them to thank for that in that respect. Different situation in the US, but in the UK, yeah. Even now, you go around a friend's house, they might not have ice. I usually take my own ice. If I'm going around a friend's house and we're going to have drinks, I take my own ice.
That's interesting.